His fingers brushed my chin, tilting my face upward until I had no choice but to meet his eyes. Eyes that held centuries of power and something darker I couldn't name. "You should never have forgotten," he whispered, his voice thunder in the distance. "You were always mine." The words fell like an ancient oath, and something inside me, an echo, an instinct, answered before I could resist. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I woke wrapped in the smell of wet earth and iron, as if the world had been torn from inside a dream that didn't belong to me. The air was thick, almost solid, and the distant sound of bells seemed to announce a destiny I didn't yet understand. When I opened my eyes, the sky was covered by a silver-coloured fog, and I didn't recognise the place where my body rested. An expanse of deserted hills, cut by winds that seemed to guard ancient memories. I felt the cold rise through my ankles, and fear took the shape of thorns beneath my skin. I didn't know who had brought me here, nor where I came from, only that something in me had changed, as if the part that made me whole had been torn away during sleep. The ground beneath me was hard and unforgiving, scattered with stones that dug into my palms as I pushed myself upright. My dress, if it could be called that, was torn and stained with mud and something darker that I didn't want to identify. My hair hung in tangled waves around my face, and when I brought my hand to my throat, I felt the weight of something cold and smooth resting against my collarbone. A necklace, an opalescent stone set in silver, pulsing with a faint warmth that seemed to contradict the icy wind whipping across the hills. I didn't remember putting it on. I didn't remember anything. The fog began to lift as the sun climbed higher, revealing a landscape that looked like it belonged to another time, or perhaps to no time at all. In the distance, dark shapes moved against the horizon, horses, riders. My heart began to race, though I couldn't say whether it was from fear or something else. Something deeper and more primal that stirred in my bones like a memory trying to surface. They found me before I could even think of running. Guards in dark uniforms, their faces hidden beneath helmets that reflected the morning light like mirrors. They didn't look at me when they lifted me by my arms, their grips firm but not cruel. They murmured among themselves in a language I should have understood but couldn't quite grasp, their voices low and urgent. I caught fragments of words. The lost one, she who should not have returned. The king will decide. Each phrase felt like a stone dropped into dark water, sending ripples through something I couldn't see but could somehow feel. My legs trembled as they forced me to walk. Each step toward the grey fortress rising in the distance was a blow of reality against my chest. The fortress, no, the castle, loomed like a sleeping giant, its walls thick with the silence of centuries, its narrow windows like the eyes of some ancient, watchful beast. The stones seemed to whisper as we approached, speaking in tongues I almost recognized, carrying secrets that made my skin prickle with recognition and dread in equal measure. As we crossed through the gates, the world changed temperature. The air inside smelled of smoke, leather, and power, raw and undiluted. The courtyard was vast, filled with soldiers training and servants hurrying about their tasks. But they all paused when they saw me. Their eyes followed my progress across the stones, some curious, others hostile, all of them knowing something I didn't. I felt smaller than I'd ever felt in my life, and yet strangely alive, as if something in me was waking up just to prove it could still feel. The guards led me through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, each turn revealing tapestries depicting battles and coronations, faces frozen in triumph or agony. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that moved like spirits along the walls. The floor was polished stone, cold even through the thin soles of my ruined shoes. Every sound echoed, the clink of armor, the whisper of fabric, the steady rhythm of boots against stone. We stopped before massive wooden doors carved with symbols I couldn't read, but that made something in my chest tighten with recognition. The guards exchanged glances, then pushed the doors open with a groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the castle. The throne room was immense, sustained by columns that reached toward a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Candles burned in rows, projecting shadows that danced on the walls like silent spectres. The air was heavy with incense and something else, anticipation perhaps, or judgment. They made me kneel on the cold stone floor, my knees striking hard enough to send sharp pain shooting up my legs. I kept my head down, staring at my own trembling hands, at the dirt beneath my fingernails, at the opalescent stone that seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight. And then he entered. He didn't need to announce himself. The sound of his boots against the floor was enough to make all the air disappear. The Alpha King. They said his voice alone could bend armies, that his gaze could strip the soul from a traitor. When I saw him, I understood why everyone bowed. There was something in his presence that seemed to belong to another time, something that couldn't be learned or inherited. He was the center around which the world turned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the lethal grace of a predator who had never known defeat. His hair was dark, pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and harder edges. A face carved by power and violence and something ancient that made my throat tighten with inexplicable longing. He wore black, simple but rich, the fabric moving like water over the hard planes of his body. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, amber like fire caught in glass, burning with an intensity that seemed to see straight through flesh and bone to whatever lay beneath. His gaze landed on me, and something ancient moved under my skin, a memory I didn't remember possessing. I felt my heart lose its rhythm, not from fear, but from recognition. It was impossible, insane, but I knew him. Not from a meeting, but from a belonging that preceded time itself. He walked toward where I knelt, taking his time, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. When he reached me, he stopped, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that his scent, cedar and smoke and something wild, wrapped around me like a physical thing. Without hurry, he extended his hand, grazing my chin with his fingertips, tilting my face upward until I had no choice but to meet those burning eyes. His touch was warm, almost feverish, and it sent electricity racing down my spine, pooling low in my belly in a way that made shame and desire war within me. "You should never have forgotten," he said, his voice low, grave, like the sound of thunder in the distance. "You were always mine." The words fell over me like an ancient oath, and something inside me, an echo, an instinct, answered before I could resist. My body knew him even if my mind didn't, recognized him in some deep cellular way that transcended memory or reason. I tried to speak, to ask who I was, who he was, what any of this meant, but my voice caught in my throat, strangled by the weight of everything I couldn't remember. He studied my face for a long moment, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with a possessiveness that should have frightened me, but instead made my skin burn with need I didn't understand. Then he straightened, his hand falling away, leaving cold air where his warmth had been. "Take her to the North Tower," he commanded, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "Give her food, clothing, whatever she needs. But she doesn't leave. She doesn't speak to anyone without my permission. She is under my protection." The way he said protection made it sound like both a promise and a threat. The guards lifted me to my feet, more gently this time, and led me away. I looked back once and found him still watching me, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with something that made my breath catch. The doors closed between us with a finality that felt like a sentence being pronounced. In the days that followed, I remained inside the castle, observed from afar by servants who whispered about me in the corridors. They spoke in hushed tones that fell silent whenever I appeared, but I caught fragments, enough to piece together a story that felt both impossible and inevitable. They said I was the Omega who had disappeared before the consecration ceremony, the one the king had searched for across years without ever admitting it. They said my absence had changed the balance of the court, that alliances had been broken, that blood had been spilled because of me, but I didn't remember any of it. The walls seemed to whisper names that were familiar, fragments of a lost life between shadows. The North Tower room they'd given me was more luxurious than anything I could have imagined, or at least anything I could remember imagining. The bed was massive, draped in velvet the color of wine, piled high with pillows and furs that seemed excessive until night fell, and I understood how cold the stone walls could be. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting forests and hunts and celebrations I didn't recognize. A fireplace dominated one wall, always lit by servants who came and went like ghosts, never meeting my eyes, never speaking unless spoken to. There was a window, narrow, like all the windows in this place, but tall enough that I could look out over the courtyard and the lands beyond. From this height, I could see for miles, rolling hills, dark forests, villages clustered around smoking chimneys like children huddled around a mother's skirts. It was beautiful and terrible all at once, this view of a world I was part of but somehow separate from. At night, I heard heavy footsteps approaching my door, that rhythmic sound making my body tremble, not from fear but from an inexplicable longing. He never entered, never knocked, but I knew it was him, standing on the other side of that thick oak door. And I knew he knew I was standing on my side, hand pressed against the wood, heart racing, waiting for something that never came. The Queen Mother looked at me with contempt whenever I crossed the great hall. She was a formidable woman, tall and cold as winter ice, her silver hair piled high on her head in elaborate braids studded with jewels that caught the light like small suns. Her voice, thin and glacial, sounded like the edge of a blade. "Don't deceive yourself, girl. What the king desires, he takes. And what he takes, the world doesn't return." There was a threat in those words and at the same time a warning. I understood that I was more than an intruder. I was the mirror of something the court preferred to forget. She had wanted him to take a proper mate, some noble daughter with the right bloodlines and political connections. Instead, he'd waited, searched, refused every match proposed to him. And now I was here, disrupting carefully laid plans, throwing the entire social order into chaos simply by existing. The other ladies of the court were no kinder. They wore their silks and jewels like armor, their smiles sharp as knives. When I passed, they would fall silent, then burst into laughter once they thought I was out of earshot. "Look at her," one would say. "She doesn't even remember how to walk properly. Did you see her try to curtsy?" Another would add, "Like a peasant at market." Their cruelty was casual, effortless, the weapon of those who had never known real suffering. But he called me to him every evening, summoning me to the great terrace where the wind beat strong against the golden banners. We would stand in silence looking at the horizon, not touching but close enough that I could feel the heat of his body like a living thing. Sometimes he would say just one sentence, "There's something in you that time couldn't erase," and then leave, abandoning me to the mercy of the wind and the weight of what I didn't know. I began to explore my prison, because that's what it was, no matter how gilded. The castle was a labyrinth of corridors and staircases, rooms that led to other rooms, halls that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking. I found a library filled with books in languages I couldn't read, a chapel with stained glass windows that painted the floor in colors like jewels, a garden enclosed by high walls where winter roses bloomed impossibly in the cold, and I found the portraits. They lined one particular corridor like sentinels, generations of rulers staring down with painted eyes. Kings and queens, alphas and their mates, each more stern and imposing than the last. I walked slowly past them, studying their faces, looking for something I couldn't name. And then I saw her. She looked like me. Not exactly. Her hair was darker, her face more angular, but there was something in the eyes. Something in the set of her mouth that made my breath catch. The plaque beneath the portrait read, "Lady Alara of the Northern Houses, beloved Omega, lost in the year of storms." I reached up without thinking, my fingers stopping just short of touching the painted face. She was my grandmother. I spun around to find a woman standing behind me, older, with kind eyes and greying hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore the plain dress of a servant, but she carried herself with a dignity that suggested she'd once been something more. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Marta," she said, moving to stand beside me, looking up at the portrait. "I served your grandmother when I was young. And your mother too, before." She trailed off, pain flickering across her features. "Before what?" I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw pity and fear warring in her expression. "Before the king's father declared their bloodline corrupted, before he banished them from court, before your mother ran, carrying you in her belly, running from a fate that would have destroyed you both." The words hit me like physical blows. I don't understand. Why would anyone? Because she was promised to him, Marta whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might hear. Your grandmother. She was meant to be the king's father's mate, to bind the northern houses to the throne forever. But she fell in love with someone else, someone deemed unsuitable. When she tried to run, he killed her chosen mate and locked her away until she withered from grief. Your mother witnessed it all as a child. She swore no daughter of hers would ever be bound to the throne. I felt dizzy, the corridor spinning around me. But the current king, he said I was his. That I always was. Marta's expression softened with something like sympathy. He was a boy when your grandmother died, just 10 years old. But he never forgot her story, never forgot the injustice of it. When he became king, he swore he would do things differently. He searched for you, the lost granddaughter, because he believed you were the one who could heal the old wounds, bridge the gap between the throne and the northern houses. But also because, she hesitated. Because? I prompted. Because he saw your portrait once, painted when you were just a child, before everything fell apart. And he told his closest advisor that he would wait for you, no matter how long it took. The revelation settled over me like a heavy cloak. I had been running from a destiny my mother had tried to protect me from, only to be caught by it anyway. The necklace around my throat suddenly felt heavier. And when I looked down at it, I saw that the opalescent stone was glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. This necklace, I said. It belonged to her, didn't it? To my grandmother, Marta nodded. It's the symbol of the northern houses. It chooses its bearer. When your grandmother died, it vanished. Everyone assumed it had been buried with her, but somehow it found its way to you. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my room, turning over everything Marta had told me, trying to reconcile it with the fragments of memory that were beginning to surface. Not clear images, but impressions, feelings, moments caught like fireflies in a jar. My mother's face, scared but determined, running through forests in the dark. Cold nights sleeping under bridges and in barns, always moving, always hiding. And then, one memory clearer than the rest, my mother on her deathbed, fever-bright and delirious, pressing something cold and heavy into my palm. Never forget who you are, she'd whispered. Never let them take that from you. And then darkness, the memory cutting off like a candle flame snuffed out. I had forgotten. Whatever had happened after my mother's death, trauma, grief, pure survival, had taken my memories and locked them away where I couldn't reach them. Until now. Until him. The footsteps came again that night, heavier than usual, more determined. This time, when they stopped outside my door, I didn't wait. I threw it open to find him standing there, hand raised as if he'd been about to knock. We stared at each other for a long moment, and in the flickering torchlight of the corridor, he looked almost vulnerable, almost human. Instead of the untouchable king he showed the world. I was going to wait, he said finally, his voice rough. I told myself I would give you time to remember on your own. But I can't, he broke off, frustration clear on his face. You're in danger here. There are those who don't want you to remember, who would rather see you disappear again permanently. I need you to understand what's at stake. Then tell me, I said, holding his gaze. Tell me everything. He looked at me for another long moment, then nodded. Come with me. He led me through the castle, down staircases I hadn't known existed, through passages that seemed to be cut into the very rock of the mountain. We went deep, far below the main floors, until the air grew cold and damp and smelled of earth and age. Finally, we emerged into a vast chamber lit by hundreds of candles, their flames reflected in the still surface of a pool of water at the room's center. This is the Hall of Remembering, he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. It's where every king and queen of my line has come to face their truth. The water, it shows you what you've forgotten, what you've hidden even from yourself. I approached the pool slowly, my heart racing. The water was perfectly clear, perfectly still, like a mirror laid flat. When I looked into it, I saw my own reflection staring back. But there was something different about it. Something in the eyes that looked older, wiser, more certain than I felt. I don't know if I'm ready, I whispered. You don't have to be ready, he said. moving to stand beside me. You just have to be willing. I knelt beside the pool and without thinking reached out to touch the water. The moment my fingers broke the surface, the world exploded into light and sound and sensation. I saw myself as a child, no more than 5, playing in a garden while my mother watched with careful eyes. I was laughing, chasing butterflies, completely unaware of the guards positioned at every entrance, the constant vigilance required to keep us safe. I saw my mother meeting with hooded figures in the dead of night, exchanging coins and whispered words, always moving us just ahead of whoever was hunting us. I saw myself at 10, practicing etiquette and protocol in secret. My mother drilling me on the proper forms of address, the hierarchies of noble houses, preparing me for something I didn't understand. I saw the day the soldiers found us. My mother pushing me out a window, screaming at me to run, to never look back. The sound of steel on steel, of her voice rising in a battle cry, and then silence. I saw the years that followed, wandering alone. My mind slowly fracturing under the weight of trauma and grief. My memories scattering like leaves in a storm until I was nothing but a hollow shell, walking through the world without knowing who or what I was. And then I saw him, younger, barely more than a boy himself, standing in a throne room while advisors argued about potential matches. He was looking at a small portrait no bigger than his palm, and his expression was one of absolute certainty. "Her," he said. "I'll wait for her." The memory shifted, and I saw him at 20, at 25, at 30, always refusing every match proposed, always searching. I saw him sending scouts to every corner of the kingdom, following every rumor of a girl with northern blood, never giving up even when everyone told him I, was long dead. I saw the moment he received word that a woman matching my description had been found collapsed near the northern border, the way his whole body went still, then moved with sudden, desperate purpose. And I saw something else, something that made my breath catch and my heart stutter. I saw a ceremony that hadn't happened yet, a consecration where I stood beside him, the opalescent necklace glowing bright as a star, binding our fates together not just politically but spiritually, making us one in a way that transcended simple marriage. The vision released me, and I found myself gasping, tears streaming down my face, my body shaking with the force of everything I'd remembered. He was there immediately, his arms around me, holding me as I shook apart and tried to piece myself back together. "I remember," I whispered against his chest. "I remember everything." "I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know." We stayed like that for a long time in that ancient chamber while the candles burned and the water reflected our joined shadows. And when I finally pulled back to look at him, I saw my own grief and determination reflected in his eyes. "They'll try to stop us," I said. "Your mother, the noble families, everyone who has a stake in the old ways. Let them try," he said, and his smile was fierce and wild. "You came back. Against all odds, against everything they did to destroy you and your line, you survived. And now you're going to take your rightful place, not as some political pawn, but as my equal, my chosen. And if I don't want that?" I asked, testing him. "If I want to walk away to be free of all this?" His expression softened, and he cupped my face in his hands with a gentleness that contradicted his earlier fierceness. "Then I'll let you go. I waited this long because I wanted you to come to me freely, not because you had no choice. I won't be like my father, binding someone to me through force or obligation. If you choose to leave, I'll give you safe passage anywhere you want to go, set you up with enough resources to live comfortably for the rest of your life. No strings, no conditions." I searched his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, but found only raw honesty. He meant it. He would actually let me go, which was precisely why I knew I wouldn't leave. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "But we do this on my terms. I'm not some prize to be claimed or some symbol to be paraded around. I'm a person with my own will and my own choices. If I stand beside you, it's because I choose to, not because some ancient bloodline says I should." His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. I wouldn't have it any other way. One morning, during the ceremony of oath-swearing of the noble houses, everything was revealed. I had been kept hidden since my arrival, seen by only a select few, while rumours swirled through the court like wildfire. Some said I was an imposter, a clever fake planted by enemies of the throne. Others claimed I was a ghost. The spirit of Lady Alara returned to haunt the bloodline that had wronged her. The truth, as always, was more complicated than fiction. They led me to the great hall dressed in white, not the pure, innocent white of a bride, but the stark, bold white of the northern winter, trimmed with silver that caught the light like fresh snow. My hair had been arranged in the northern style, braided and pinned with small crystal beads that chimed softly when I moved. And around my throat the opalescent necklace burned like a captured piece of the moon. The hall fell silent as I entered. I could feel every eye on me, could hear the sharp intake of breath, the murmured questions and accusations. I held my head high, channeling every lesson my mother had drilled into me during those secret nights, embodying the noble blood I'd been born to even if I'd spent years denying it. The noble houses were arrayed in their formal positions, each family standing beneath their banners. The silver wolf of House Northron, the crimson eagle of House Highvale, the golden stag of House Meadowbrook. And at their head, on her throne of carved oak, sat the Queen Mother, her face a mask of cold fury barely contained. I was conducted to the centre of the hall, made to stand alone in a circle of light cast by the great windows above. The chief counsellor, a severe woman with iron-grey hair and eyes like flint, stepped forward. "This woman," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space, "found without name or memory, claims through her possession of certain artifacts to be the lost heir of the northern houses. Yet she remembers nothing of her past, can produce no witnesses to verify her claims. How are we to know she is not some clever deceiver sent to destabilize the throne?" The murmurs grew louder, angry now, threatening. I saw faces twisted with contempt and fear, saw hands moving toward weapons, saw the careful order of the court beginning to fracture. This was the moment. They would either accept me or tear me apart. And I suddenly understood that my survival hung on a knife's edge. Then he stood. The king rose from his throne with a fluid grace that drew every eye, commanded every breath. He descended the steps slowly, deliberately, each footfall echoing like a heartbeat in the sudden silence. He crossed the floor toward me, and I watched him come with my heart in my throat, knowing that whatever happened next would define both our futures. He stopped before me, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, could smell cedar and smoke and something wild. Without breaking eye contact, he reached for the necklace at my throat, lifting it gently to examine it in the light. "This stone," he said, his voice pitched to carry, "has been lost for 30 years. It disappeared when Lady Alara died, and despite extensive searches was never recovered. The northern houses believed it buried with her, or destroyed. Yet here it is, around the throat of a woman who appeared from nowhere. A woman who some would call an imposter." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, then continued. "But this stone cannot be stolen. It cannot be given. It can only be claimed by one of true northern blood, by the rightful heir of House Northron. And more than that, it responds to its bearer. Watch." He released the necklace, and as it fell back against my chest, it began to glow. Not the faint pulse I'd noticed before, but a brilliant, radiant light that filled the entire hall, turning everything silver and beautiful. Gasps echoed off the walls, and even the Queen Mother looked shaken, her mask of control cracking. "I have seen this stone's power demonstrated once before," the king continued, "in the historical records kept by the royal archivists. When Lady Alara wore it, it glowed like this in the presence of her true mate. And it glowed again the moment I first touched this woman's hand. If you doubt her identity, doubt the testimony of the stone itself. If you question her right to stand here, question the magic that flows through the bloodline that has protected this kingdom for generations." He turned to face the assembled nobles, his hand finding mine, fingers intertwining in a grip that was both possessive and protective. "I present to you Lady Seraphina of House Northron, granddaughter of Lady Alara, daughter of the lost Isolde. She is under my protection, and more than that, she is my chosen mate. Any who wish to challenge her right to stand here will answer to me." The sound that followed was deafening, Shouts of shock, protests, a few scattered cheers from those loyal to the old northern families. The Queen Mother rose from her throne, her face white with rage. "You cannot do this," she cried. "The law requires—" "The law," the king interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "requires that an alpha king choose his mate according to his own judgment, considering the good of the kingdom and the stability of the throne. I have chosen. Lady Seraphina brings with her the loyalty of the northern houses, ends a 30-year feud, and carries a bloodline as old and noble as my own. What better choice could there be?" I felt my knees start to buckle, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, the revelation, the claims, the sudden shift from nobody to somebody, from lost to found. But his hand tightened on mine, steadying me, and when I looked at him, I saw such fierce pride and determination in his eyes that I found my own strength again. The chief counselor stepped forward, her expression still severe but thoughtful now. "The stone's testimony is difficult to argue against. If what you say is true, Your Majesty, then this is indeed Lady Seraphina. But the consecration rites will be performed at the next full moon," he said firmly. "You'll have time to verify her lineage through whatever means you require. But I warn you all," and here his voice took on a dangerous edge, "she is under my protection. Any harm that comes to her, any accident or misfortune, will be considered an act of treason against the crown. Am I understood?" Silence answered him. The silence of submission, of fear, of a court that knew when it had been outmaneuvered. One by one, the noble houses began to bow, acknowledging the inevitable. Even the Queen Mother, after a long moment of visible struggle, inclined her head in the barest gesture of acceptance. I stood in that circle of light, transformed from nobody to somebody in the space of heartbeats, and I finally understood what my mother had tried to protect me from. Not the weight of my heritage itself, but the loss of choice that came with it. But here, now, I was choosing it. Not because I had to, but because standing beside him felt like coming home. He leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice pitched for me alone. "I'm terrified," I admitted, "but I'm not running." His smile was private, meant just for me. "Good, because I meant what I said. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine." The way he said mine should have made me bristle, should have awakened every instinct to rebel against being claimed. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through me, a sense of belonging I'd been missing my entire life without knowing it. Because the flip side of being his was that he was mine too, bound by the same oath, the same choice, the same impossible fate. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and politics. The noble houses sent delegations to meet with me, to assess whether I was truly who I claimed to be. They brought genealogists and historians, old portraits and family records, testing my knowledge of bloodlines and alliances. Thanks to my mother's secret lessons, I knew more than they expected, and the few gaps in my knowledge could be explained by my years of lost memory. But it was the northern families who truly welcomed me. They arrived at the castle like a tide coming home, bearing gifts and pledges of loyalty, tears streaming down weathered faces as they looked at me and saw their lost lady returned. Old men who remembered my grandmother knelt before me and wept. Women who had served my mother pressed tokens into my hands, a ribbon, a pressed flower, a small carved bird, treasures they'd kept hidden for decades, waiting for this impossible moment. Marta became my constant companion, teaching me the intricacies of court life that my mother's lessons had only touched on. How to navigate the complex web of alliances and grudges that defined the nobility. Which families could be trusted and which smiled while sharpening knives. How to speak in the coded language of court, where every word had 3 meanings, and silence could be its own form of warfare. "The Queen Mother is your greatest threat," she told me one evening as she helped me prepare for dinner. She had other plans for her son, specifically Lady Cordelia of House High Vale. Beautiful, accomplished, from one of the most powerful families in the kingdom. She's been groomed since childhood to be queen. "Where is Lady Cordelia now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "At court," Marta said quietly. "She arrived 3 days ago. You'll meet her tonight." The great hall was a sea of silk and jewels when I entered that evening. The long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and exotic fruits, wine flowed like water, and musicians played softly from a gallery above. I wore a gown of deep blue velvet that Marta had chosen, with the opalescent necklace prominent at my throat. My hair was arranged in northern braids again, a deliberate statement of my heritage. I found her immediately. She was impossible to miss. Lady Cordelia sat at the high table beside the Queen Mother, a vision of golden perfection. Her hair fell in artful waves around a face that could have been carved by a master sculptor. Her smile practiced and brilliant. She wore crimson silk that complemented her colouring perfectly, and jewels that caught the candlelight like small fires. When she saw me, her smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her blue eyes. The king stood when I entered, a gesture that forced everyone else to stand as well, acknowledging my status. He came to escort me to the high table himself, his hand warm and solid at my elbow, guiding me to the seat at his right hand, the place traditionally reserved for the future queen. Lady Cordelia's smile took on a sharp edge. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice musical and perfectly modulated. "You didn't mention we would have such interesting company this evening." "Lady Seraphina," he said, his tone making it clear that her title was no courtesy but a fact. "May I present Lady Cordelia of House Highvale?" "My lady," I said, inclining my head with exactly the degree of courtesy due to someone of equal rank, neither more nor less. Her eyes narrowed fractionally at the implied equality. "How fascinating that you've recovered your memories so conveniently. Tell me, what do you remember of your childhood? I confess I'm curious about your years in exile." It was a trap, of course. If I couldn't produce detailed memories, I would look like a fraud. If I produced too many, she would find inconsistencies to exploit. I took a slow sip of wine, buying time to think, then met her gaze directly. "I remember my mother's hands braiding my hair," I said quietly. "I remember sleeping under bridges when we couldn't afford an inn. I remember eating food from garbage heaps when there was nothing else. I remember watching her die in a filthy room in a border town, begging me not to forget who I was." I paused, letting the stark honesty of it settle over the table. "But I also remember the lessons she taught me in secret. How to hold myself, how to speak, how to be worthy of a legacy she knew I might never claim. She prepared me for this even while hoping I'd never need it." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Cordelia's perfect smile had frozen on her face, and even the Queen Mother looked uncomfortable. I hadn't played their game. I'd simply told the truth, raw and unvarnished, and in doing so had made myself human in a way their political maneuvering never could. The king's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. When I glanced at him, I saw approval and something warmer in his eyes. The rest of the dinner passed in careful conversation and subtle warfare. Lady Cordelia recovered her composure quickly, turning her charm on the other guests, laughing at jokes and complimenting gowns, playing the role of perfect courtier with effortless grace. She never attacked directly again, but I felt the weight of her attention, the calculating assessment behind every glance. When the meal finally ended and the king led me onto the dance floor for the traditional first waltz, I let myself relax slightly in his arms. The music swelled, a haunting melody that seemed to speak of lost things found and old wrongs righted. "You handled that well," he murmured as we turned across the polished floor. "She hates me," I said. "She's threatened by you. There's a difference, is there?" He pulled me slightly closer, close enough that it bordered on improper, his hand spanning my waist possessively. "She had expectations. I never encouraged them, but she and my mother built castles in the air regardless. It's not your fault that reality doesn't match their plans." "She would have been a good queen," I said, surprising myself with the admission. "Beautiful, accomplished, well-trained in court politics. Why did you refuse her?" His eyes met mine, and the intensity there made my breath catch. "Because when I looked at her, I felt nothing. When I look at you, I feel everything." The rawness of the confession made heat flood through me. We were in the middle of a crowded ballroom, dozens of eyes watching our every move, and yet in that moment, it felt like we were entirely alone. The dance ended, but neither of us moved to separate, caught in that electric moment of connection. It was the Queen Mother who broke the spell, appearing at the edge of the dance floor with Lady Cordelia in tow. "How charming," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Perhaps Lady Seraphina would enjoy some fresh air. The terrace is lovely at night, and I'm sure Lady Cordelia would be happy to keep you company while my son attends to his other guests." It was a command disguised as a suggestion, a test disguised as courtesy. The king looked like he wanted to refuse, but I touched his arm lightly. "Of course," I said. "I would love some air." Lady Cordelia's smile was triumphant as she linked her arm through mine and practically dragged me toward the terrace doors. The moment we were outside, her mask dropped completely. "You don't belong here," she hissed, her beautiful face ugly with rage. "I don't care what ancient bloodline you claim or what magical trinket you wear. You're a nobody who spent her life in the gutter. You don't know how to be a queen." "You're right," I said calmly, refusing to be baited. "I don't know how to be a queen, but I know how to survive. I know what it's like to have nothing and fight for everything. And I know that whatever I become, I'll have earned it myself, not had it handed to me on a silver platter." Her hand shot out, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "Do you think he'll actually go through with it? Do you think the court will accept you? One scandal, one mistake, and they'll tear you apart. And I'll be right there, ready to pick up the pieces." I pulled my arm free, meeting her fury with calm determination. "Then I won't make mistakes." "Everyone makes mistakes," she said, her voice dropping to something more dangerous. "And when you do, I'll make sure the whole kingdom sees it. I'll destroy you so thoroughly that even he won't be able to protect you." Before I could respond, the terrace doors burst open and he was there, his eyes blazing with barely contained rage. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. Lady Cordelia's mask snapped back into place instantly. "Of course not, Your Majesty. We were simply getting acquainted." "Good," he said. "Then you won't mind if I steal my intended for the rest of the evening." He offered me his arm, and I took it gratefully, letting him lead me away from Lady Cordelia's poisonous presence. We didn't stop walking until we climbed to the highest tower of the castle, emerging onto a private terrace where the wind whipped our clothes and the stars stretched endlessly overhead. "I'm sorry," he said, turning to face me. "I should have warned you about her. I should have—" "You can't protect me from everything," I interrupted, "and I don't want you to. I can handle Lady Cordelia and the Queen Mother and whoever else decides I'm a threat. I didn't survive this long by being fragile." He looked at me for a long moment, then laughed. A real laugh, deep and genuine. "No," he agreed. "You're not fragile. You're steel wrapped in silk, and anyone who underestimates you is going to learn that the hard way." We stood together in the wind, looking out over the sleeping kingdom, and I felt something shift inside me. A final acceptance of who and what I was meant to be. Not because prophecy or bloodline demanded it, but because I chose it. "Are you sure about this?" I asked quietly. "About me? It would be easier to choose someone like Lady Cordelia, someone the court already accepts." "I don't want easy," he said fiercely. "I want real. I want someone who knows what it costs to survive, who understands that power comes with responsibility, who won't let the weight of the crown crush the person underneath. I want you." And there, under the stars with the wind howling, around us and the whole kingdom spread out below, he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming and promising and sealing something that had been inevitable from the moment I'd woken on those desolate hills. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and I kissed him back with everything. I had all my fear and hope and desperate need to belong somewhere, to someone. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "The consecration is in 3 weeks," he said. 3 weeks, and then nothing can separate us. Can you survive 3 weeks? "I can survive anything," I told him. "As long as I know what I'm surviving for." The next 3 weeks were the longest and shortest of my life. Every day brought new challenges, lessons in protocol and history, meetings with noble families who wanted to assess my worthiness, endless fittings for the ceremonial robes I would wear during the consecration. And every night, I felt the weight of Lady Cordelia's and the Queen Mother's gazes, watching for any sign of weakness, any opportunity to strike. They found one 2 days before the ceremony. I had been in the library, studying the ancient texts that described the consecration ritual when a young servant boy burst in, his face white with panic. "My lady," he gasped. "Please, you have to come. It's your friend, Marta. She's been accused." I ran. Through corridors and downstairs, following the sound of raised voices to the great hall where a crowd had gathered. In the center, Marta knelt with her hands bound, her face bruised, and her dress torn. The Queen Mother stood over her like a judge pronouncing sentence. "This woman," the Queen Mother announced as I pushed through the crowd, "has been caught stealing from the royal treasury. She was found with this in her possession." She held up a jeweled brooch, one I recognized as belonging to the Crown collection. "That's impossible," I said, my voice ringing clear. "Marta would never steal." "And yet the evidence speaks for itself," the Queen Mother replied coldly. "Unless you're suggesting someone planted it in her quarters, what a convenient excuse." I looked at Marta and saw the truth in her eyes. This was a trap, and we both knew it. They couldn't attack me directly, so they'd gone after someone close to me, someone vulnerable. And if Marta was convicted, it would reflect on my judgment. Make me look foolish for trusting a thief, undermine my credibility just days before the consecration. "I'm suggesting exactly that," I said clearly. "And I'm prepared to prove it," the crowd murmured. The Queen Mother's eyes glittered with malice. "By all means," she said. "Prove it." I turned to Marta. "When were you last in your quarters?" "This morning, my lady," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I left just after dawn to attend to my duties." "And did you lock your door?" "Yes, my lady. I always do." I turned back to the Queen Mother. "Who found the brooch?" "One of my personal guards," she said, "during a routine security check." "A routine security check," I repeated slowly. "Of a servant's quarters? How thorough? And tell me, was the door locked when your guard arrived?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed the Queen Mother's face. "Aye. That detail wasn't mentioned in the report." "What?" "Then perhaps we should ask the guard directly." I looked around the crowd until I spotted him, a hard-faced man in the Queen Mother's colours. "You, was the door locked?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicions. "No, my lady." "Strange," I said softly. "Marta locks her door every morning, but when your guard arrives to conduct a routine check, one that, I might add, has never been done before in the months I've been here, the door is conveniently unlocked. And inside, conveniently in plain view, is a brooch worth a small fortune." The crowd was murmuring louder now, uncertainty spreading like ripples in a pond. I pressed my advantage. "Tell me something else. How does a servant, who earns perhaps 10 silver pieces a month, who has spent her entire life in service to this castle, who by all accounts is honest and trustworthy, suddenly decide to steal an item she couldn't possibly sell without immediately being caught? What was her plan? Walk into the nearest merchant and ask for change?" "Thieves rarely think ahead," the Queen Mother said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "No," I agreed, "but people setting traps do." The silence that followed was electric. I had just accused the Queen Mother of framing Marta, had done it publicly and in front of half the court. It was a move that could destroy me if I was wrong, but I knew I wasn't. "This is outrageous," the Queen Mother began, but I cut her off. "Is it? Then let's make this simple. The brooch was allegedly taken from the treasury. The treasury is locked, with only a handful of people having keys. My understanding is that there's a log kept of everyone who enters and exits, with times recorded. Let's examine that log. Let's see who accessed the treasury in the hours before the brooch was found in Marta's quarters." The Queen Mother's face went white, then red with rage. She knew she was trapped. If the log showed her or one of her people accessing the treasury, it would prove my point. If she refused to produce the log, it would look like an admission of guilt. Into the tense silence, a voice rang out. An excellent suggestion. The crowd parted like water, and he strode through, his presence commanding instant attention. He looked at the Queen Mother with an expression that made her take a step back. "Well, Mother, shall we examine the log?" "This is unnecessary," she said stiffly. The girl was clearly... "The log," he repeated, his voice like iron. Now, 20 minutes later, the truth was laid bare. The log showed one of the Queen Mother's personal maids accessing the treasury that morning, removing the brooch and returning without it. The same maid, when questioned, broke down and confessed to planting it in Marta's room on the Queen Mother's orders. The hall erupted in chaos. The Queen Mother stood frozen, her mask of control shattered, while Marta was quickly unbound and helped to her feet by sympathetic hands. I felt the king's hand on my shoulder steadying me as I swayed with relief and residual adrenaline. "Mother," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you will retire to your quarters. We'll discuss your behavior in private. As for the rest of you," he addressed the crowd, "let this serve as a lesson. Lady Seraphina is under my protection, and so are those she calls friend. Any who seek to harm them will answer to me." He turned to me, his eyes searching my face. "Are you all right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He pulled me close, heedless of the watching crowd, and for a moment I let myself lean into his strength. "2 more days," he murmured against my hair. "2 more days, and then no one will dare touch you or yours again." That night, alone in my tower room with Marta sleeping peacefully in a chair by the fire, after I'd refused to let her return to her own quarters, I stood at the window and looked out at the sleeping kingdom. The moon was nearly full, waxing toward its peak toward the night when everything would change. I thought about my mother, who had died to keep me safe from this very fate. I thought about my grandmother, who had been destroyed by someone who thought they had the right to own her heart. And I thought about the choice that lay before me, to walk into that consecration chamber in 2 days and bind myself to a king, to a crown, to a destiny that had been hunting me since before I was born. But it was my choice now, not theirs, mine. And I chose to take back everything that had been stolen from my family, the power, the position, the right to stand tall and unafraid. I chose to be the woman who survived and the woman who would make sure no one else had to suffer the way we had. The opalescent stone pulsed warm against my skin, and I touched it gently, feeling the power that flowed through it, the legacy of strong women who had fought and loved and endured. I was their daughter, their granddaughter, their heir, and I would honor them by being everything they hadn't been allowed to be. 2 more days, and then the world would learn that the lost Omega had returned, and she was done hiding. The night of the consecration arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the earth itself was celebrating. The ceremony would take place at midnight, under the full moon, in the sacred grove that had witnessed such unions for 1,000 years. I spent the day in ritual preparation, bathed in water infused with herbs that were supposed to cleanse the spirit, anointed with oils that smelled of sage and roses, dressed in robes of white silk that flowed like water and were embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like captured moonbeams. Marta helped me with my hair, braiding it in the intricate northern style that marked me as heir to House Northron, weaving in small crystals that would catch the moonlight. The opalescent necklace rested against my throat, glowing softly, responding to my quickening heartbeat as the appointed hour approached. "You're beautiful," Marta whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud." I took her hand, squeezing gently. She prepared me for this. Even when she hoped I'd never need it, she made sure I would be ready if the time came. A knock sounded at the door, and one of the priestesses entered, an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see through to the soul. "It's time," she said simply. The walk to the grove seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. Torches lined the path, their flames dancing in the warm breeze, and I could hear the murmur of the assembled witnesses. All the noble houses, all the important families come to witness history being written. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept my head high, my steps steady. The grove itself was ancient, the trees so old they seemed to have stood since the beginning of time. Their branches formed a natural cathedral overhead, and the moonlight filtered through in silver beams that illuminated a circular clearing. At the center stood an altar of white stone, carved with symbols I recognized from my studies, the ancient language of binding and promise, of soul calling to soul across the boundaries of self. He waited there, dressed in black that made him look like a piece of the night itself, powerful and dangerous and beautiful. When he saw me, his expression transformed, fierce joy and possessive pride, and something softer that made my heart stutter. The priestess led me forward until I stood across from him, the altar between us. The crowd fell silent, even the wind seeming to hold its breath. The priestess began to speak in the old tongue, words of power and binding that resonated in my bones. "We stand witness to a consecration," she said, switching to the common language so all could understand. Two souls choosing to become one, two bloodlines choosing to unite, two hearts choosing to beat as a single drum. Do you come here freely, without coercion or force? I do, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the grove. I do, he echoed, his eyes never leaving mine. The priestess nodded. Then speak your vows that all may hear and witness. He spoke first, his voice strong and sure. I, Aldrich, son of Theron, king of this realm, and Alpha of the bloodline, take you, Seraphina of House Northron, as my mate and my queen. I vow to stand beside you, not above you, to respect your strength, not diminish it, to share power, not hoard it, to choose you daily, not from obligation, but from desire. I bind myself to you, body and soul, until death parts us, and perhaps beyond. The vows were traditional in form, but revolutionary in content, speaking of partnership instead of possession, of choice instead of command. The crowd murmured, recognizing the departure from custom, but no one dared object. Then it was my turn. I drew a deep breath and spoke the words I'd written myself, defying tradition completely. I, Seraphina, daughter of Isolde, heir of House Northron, take you, Aldrich, as my mate and my equal. I vow to stand strong beside you, to challenge you when you need challenging, to support you when you need support. I vow to be your partner in ruling, not your ornament. I vow to honor my own strength while respecting yours. I choose you freely and fully, and I bind myself to you body and soul, until death parts us and perhaps beyond. The silence that followed was absolute. I had just claimed equality with a king, had just announced my intention to rule alongside him rather than decoratively supporting him. It was unprecedented. It was outrageous. It was perfect. A smile spread across his face, wild and free and absolutely devastating. Well, he said, loud enough for all to hear, I suppose the kingdom is about to find out what happens when a king meets his match. Laughter rippled through the crowd, releasing the tension, and the priestess raised her hands. By the power vested in me by ancient law and sacred tradition, I declare these two souls bound. Let no one seek to separate what has been joined under the moon's witness. He moved then, circling the altar in 3 quick strides and pulling me into his arms. The kiss was nothing like the one on the terrace. This was claiming and promising and sealing in front of everyone who mattered. His hand tangled in my hair, careful of the crystals, while the other spanned my waist, pulling me flush against him. I kissed him back with everything I had, pouring into it all my fear and hope and fierce determination to make this work. When we finally broke apart, the grove erupted in cheers and applause. But more than that, I felt it. The magic of the consecration taking hold, binding us on a level deeper than words or vows. I could feel his heartbeat as if it were my own, could sense his emotions like a second layer over my feelings. And I knew with absolute certainty that he felt the same. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn. We danced and feasted, accepted congratulations and gifts, navigated the complex social currents of a court that was still coming to terms with what had just happened. Lady Cordelia was notably absent, having left the castle the day before, reportedly to visit family. The Queen Mother attended but kept to herself, her expression stony and unreadable. But none of it mattered. Not the politics or the plotting, not the people who wished me ill or the ones who supported me. All that mattered was the man whose hand held mine, whose eyes promised forever, whose strength I could lean on while maintaining my own. As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, we stood together on the highest terrace of the castle, the same place where he'd first told me I carried something time couldn't erase. He wrapped his arms around me from behind and I leaned back into his warmth, feeling the solid reality of him, of us, of everything we'd fought for and won. "No regrets?" he murmured against my hair. "None," I said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Good," he said, "because you're stuck with me now." I turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I'm not stuck. I'm choosing. Every day for the rest of my life, I'll wake up and choose you." His smile was soft this time, private, meant only for me, and I'll choose you right back. We stood there as the sun climbed higher, as the kingdom woke to its new reality, as our future spread out before us filled with challenges and triumphs we couldn't yet imagine. I thought about the girl who had woken on those desolate hills just weeks ago, lost and alone and terrified. She seemed like a different person now, or maybe just the person I was always meant to become, given the chance. The lost Omega had returned. The broken bloodline was restored. The ancient wrong was being righted, one choice at a time. And as I stood there in the arms of the king I'd chosen and who had chosen me, I understood that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this journey of discovery, redemption, and fierce love, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement truly means everything. It's what allows stories like this to reach others who might need to hear about strength found in vulnerability, power claimed through choice, and love that honors rather than diminishes. Consider leaving a like if this resonated with you, and subscribe to join us for more tales of those who refuse to stay lost. Thank you for being part of this community.